little bit about me, and I was sharing this with some of you earlier before we got started. Doug Bouws, rhymes with house. Sometimes people not sure how to say it. Vice President of Client Services with Money for Ministry. Been doing this work for 10 years. Prior to that, I was pastor of a congregation in Northern California. I was pastor of hospitality, and did everything from small groups to diaconal work to stewardship and planned giving. Even helped start an endowment. But Money for Ministry, our mission is enduring impact for nonprofits, which is good, but I think it's a little vague. So here's my take. Here's how I make it really super specific. We want to see every family have a will, every will have a gift to a ministry in it, and every ministry have a sustainable future. And some of the stories you just told, I don't even need to say why that's going to lead to sustainable futures, because I think it's the gifts can be so impactful and so ministry changing. It's amazing. So I want to talk a little bit about, I asked you on scale 1 to 10, and this comes from talking to hundreds of people like you who are doing this all the time. And a lot of times people think planned giving is scary, and that they don't know enough. And one story that stood out to me that I think captures this super well, we were talking to a group. So we serve ministries of all sizes. Some, like you do. It's one thing you do among many. Some of the larger ministries, they might have a 20-person major gift team. And each person, their only job is to talk to a different segment of their donor base. And so it was in one of these 20-person major gift team meetings, and we asked that question, and there was a major gift officer in the room, and he said, somewhat defiantly, but with a twinkle in his eye, because I think he was just trying to kind of pick a fight and be playful, he said, "I never bring up planned giving, never in the donor conversation." And we were like, "Really? And why is that?" To which he said, "Because I'm afraid the donor might be interested." Which is his way of saying, right, like maybe the donor will know more than I do. I'm scared about this. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm talking about. So if that's you, you're in good company. There's lots of people like you out there. We want to talk today about how planned giving doesn't have to be scary, and it's fun, and you can do it. One more story along those lines. The term planned giving, and that's why I asked you, where do you rank yourself? Even the term itself is pretty confusing. Russell James, if you know that name, that would be, he's like, most people don't, right? Like I tell my kids, Russell James, he's like the LeBron James of planned giving, or he's every little part of the world has their guru. He's the guru for planned giving. Only 37% of people over the age of 30 know what the term planned giving means. So this ministry we were serving, it's a rescue mission in Albany. I think they've sent folks here in the past, but they were doing an event, and they had a remit device as part of the event, a reply device, and one of the check boxes on the device was, "I'm interested in learning more about planned giving." And one of the donors who was present checked that box, and so, of course, they were doing good follow-up, so they called the donor, wanted to know more about them, and said, "Hey, how can we help you? I understand you want to know more about planned giving," to which the donor said, "Well, yeah, I planned to make a gift that day, and I did." So again, the minister, awkward conversation. Oh, that's not what we meant. But the idea here is planned giving is confusing. It's not a term that everyone's super familiar with. So we're going to try to get past that today. So again, it can be fun, and you can do it. I'm actually going to start with the "you can do it" part and talk a little bit about that. And so first of all, 85 to 90% of all planned giving is the simple gift in the will. So if you know, and somebody used the word bequest today, I would say even that's a fancy term that not everybody, especially your donors, know what you mean when you say that. You might know what you mean, but your donors might know. But if you can say, "I, Doug Bouws, give," there again, I could say bequeath, but I'm just going to say give, so we're all on the same page here. 3%, 5%, 10% of my estate to the path of Citrus County. Now, Dwayne's saying, write that down, Doug, right? 85 to 90% of what it means to do planned giving.
You usually find bequest in your donor software or QuickBooks.
Yeah.
Not The donor doesn't know what that
Donor
is.
doesn't.
But if you're doing a line item, then you'll find it.
You'll see it, right?
Is it in QuickBooks? It's in QuickBooks.
Is that what they say, bequest, right?
It's a
Yeah.
line item. And, and again, even if it wasn't there, when you record it and you put that in the line item for the board members, they know what that means.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not wrong. It's the right term. But I remember the first time I was sitting in a plan, like bequest. I think that means gift in the will. But am I right? Right? Like, I'm not super sure. So,
And it's the most speculative line item in the whole budget.
right.
Every year, I just take a wild guess.
Yeah.
Well, we got this last year. What do you think? It's a great faith line.
Right. So the next 5% is the charitable gift annuity. So I'm not going to talk about that a ton today, but it's not too hard to wrap your head around a charitable gift annuity. But the last 5% is the part I think that makes most of us super scared, which is, charitable remainder trust and pooled income funds and all these things, cruts and crats and things that make people. I like to say the good news is if you know what a gift in the will is, you know what a charitable gift annuity is, you know 90% of everything you need to know about planned giving, and for everything else, make a good referral. Hopefully there's somebody in your world that maybe it's an attorney on your board, maybe it is a local community foundation. It's National Christian Foundation. That's another great example of, if you're familiar with them, they work with wealthy donors. So a lot of times it's just really having a good relationship, loving your donors, serving your donors. I was talking to Jonathan Walsh from Downtown Rescue Mission over lunch or breakfast this morning, and he was saying, yeah, I've got like 5 or 6 donors, and I just check in on them. I try to serve them, love them. I'm like, that's right. That's what you need to do with those folks. And a lot of people have their own attorneys already, or they go online. So your job is to manage the relationship. It doesn't need to be technical. So here's the other thing that, again, in this, we've kind of touched on this already. People assume that planned giving is for the wealthy only, because it is for the wealthy, for sure. But this is what we're going to talk about today really in detail, is that in addition to the wealthy, what you have in your file are what we call these under-the-radar, hidden major donors. So we're not going to ignore the wealthy. We know they have planned gifts to make, and those gifts are going to be worth a lot. But what we often miss is what we like to call the widow's mite donor. And again, that comes from the story that Jesus tells in the New Testament, which I'm assuming you know, but let me retell it for you, right? So imagine that Jesus and his disciples are in the temple, and they're watching the gifts come in, right? And which is kind of an interesting thing to begin with, right? I mean, you say, don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. But imagine they're off in the corner, and this is a coin-based currency, right? So people bring in large sacks of metal coins, and they have these huge metal receptacles. So when they drop those coins in, right, like there's a lot of noise being made and a lot of clatter, and it draws a lot of attention, and you can imagine, whoa, did you hear that, right? Like, the thing almost fell over with that one. And in walks this little old lady, and she drops in her last 2 mites. Think, think. And you can just imagine Jesus being like, you guys, did you see that? Did you see that? Right? Like, look, that, right there, that's what I'm talking about. All those wealthy people, she gave more than all those wealthy people because they gave out of their riches, but she, out of her poverty, gave everything she had. And it's those folks, the loyal, faithful, longtime donors, what we sometimes call the widow's mite. Now, the example Bruce gave is a version of that. It's not quite, they weren't longtime, loyal, and faithful, but they were certainly under the radar. But you've got a lot of these people in your file already, and when they include you in their will, people who were at first friends now have become family, right? You are an heir to their estate, and that is an amazing deal. That's a pretty good deal. So we're going to talk a little bit about that some more today. Who are these friends, and how ripe is your file for planned giving? So I want to talk a little bit today about the 12-12-12 model for planned giving. And this is a great way for you to get a sense for what already is in your file. So to identify planned giving prospects, look for your most loyal donors, which will be those with history, frequency, or recency. So history, 12 years on file. Frequency, at least 12 gifts or more. Recency, a gift in the last 12 months. Now, what's not in the list, and what people often say to me is, well, what about, largest single gift size? Does that matter? It can influence, but it's not a main predictor. Lifetime total giving. Not so important. Age. A lot of people want to think, well, we got to be talking to the old people, right? Well, if you want to start to segment for those whose gift you think you might get sooner, you could segment by age, but it does not. Age by itself is not a predictor of a gift in the will. And then the last one too is well screens. I hear this all the time. Oh, we had a well screen. Can we use that to help segment for our legacy prospects? Well, there again, a well screen is going to tell you who has the capacity to make a large gift, but it tells you nothing about the propensity of a gift to you, to your organization. It doesn't tell you loyalty, long-time loyal, faithful donors. So here's an exercise for you to do. You can go home tonight. I don't know, we're not going home tonight, but if you have access to your CRM or your database, run that query, 12, 12, 12, 12 years on file, 12 gifts or more, a gift in the last 24 or 12 months, and how many donors turn up. And this will give you an idea of the potential that is in your file already. And really, 12, 12, 12 I think is a starting point. We work with organizations, you guys haven't been around 12 years, right? So what if it's, we'll say, with a lot of our clients, a lot of our ministries, we'll talk about a gift in the last 24 months. Because, again, I was sitting in on another session this morning, Scott Swedenberg from Blue Dog, he was saying, hey, those donors from 12 to 24 months, they still consider themselves to be one of your donors, but they've forgotten that it's been that long since they give it to you. For sure that's true with legacy prospects. So for some ministries, it could be like, I've been a donor, been on file 5 years, at least 10 gifts, a gift in the last 24 months. It really just depends on where your file is and what you see. We've worked with ministries too, like there's ones where huge donor files and maybe it's a church and donors give weekly. You might see somebody who's been on file 10 years, a minimum of 48 gifts and a gift in the last 12 months, right? Like the point is 12, 12, 12 is a starting point. So go home, run that query and see what you come up with, and you have an idea of what the potential is in your file. Some other donor data points that do matter and that we recommend you pay attention to would be volunteers, so people who volunteer and also give. They're wonderful plan giving prospects. Maybe founding members, longtime board members. Here's another interesting stat, monthly donors, recurring donors. We did a webinar with Dave Raley back in January. If you know that name, Dave just came out with a book this year. February 4, I think, was the launch date. It was The Rise of the Recurring Donor. He talks all about the subscription economy that we live in today and donors that, people are so accustomed to paying for things on a monthly basis that there seems to be an increased willingness to consider giving on a monthly basis. But he goes into all the motivations for that, the things that you want to be thinking about, want to be aware of. What's interesting to us in the legacy conversation, we did some digging into our data on that conversation, on that question. Donors that have been on file 10 years or more, and after 10 years it doesn't matter if it's 10, 20, 15, but donors who give at least 5 times a year are 42% more likely to include you in their will than donors who give twice a year. So that frequency matters. That's the point I'm trying to make. Frequency matters. All right, so now that you know who your best plan giving prospects are, what are we going to do next? And here's where I think the best thing that you can do is create a conversation, which sounds obvious. The assumption that a lot of people like to make is that, well, these conversations need to be in person or over the phone. And the beautiful thing about using surveys, as I'm hinting at here, is that you can scale the conversation. So I want to talk about that a little bit, because people make assumptions when I talk about using surveys. And they say, oh, surveys, you want to do a survey? Yeah, I know what that means. A survey means you're going to do some lead generation. And to which I would say, yeah, you're right. Actually, surveys do generate leads, and that's super, super helpful because you might have 10, 15, 20,000 donors on file, but because you've done some good segmentation, 12, 12, 12, and then you've sent out a survey to, let's just say, 2,000 of those donors that you've surfaced through that 12, 12, 12 segmentation, out of that, a survey will help you identify maybe the top 10 or the top 20 or the top 50. And you can focus your follow-up and be super strategic in who you talk to. So that is an important part of the conversation. Sometimes people will say to me, oh yeah, surveys, you're going to discover people that were already in your file that have already included you in their will, and you just didn't know who they were. And again, I would say, yes, that is true. You will. And that is super helpful because well-stewarded legacy donors, in other words, people where you know their name and you can thank them personally and you can include them. Now, you don't have to create a legacy society. Some ministries do, but you have some strategic plan to care for these donors from now until the day Jesus calls them home. Their giving will, on average, this is another Russell James statistic, the LeBron James of planned giving, will on average be twice that the rest of your file. And sometimes people will say to me, well, if I include you in their will, doesn't that mean then that if they include us in their will, that they're going to give less today? And in fact, the opposite is true. The idea is that you're in my will. You're not just a friend, you're family. So your work today matters to me even more because I'm invested in you, not just for today, but for the future, for generations to come. So super helpful to know who they are. But here's the last thing about surveys, and this is what most people don't realize or overlook, and that's that using a survey will move people to action. And by action, I mean they've done it, which is a big deal. Because it's a lot of work to update your will, and it takes a lot of gumption to get over the hump and say, I'm going to think about my death, I'm going to think about my mortality, I'm going to change my will, I'm going to include a ministry in it. But surveys can move people to do that, even if you do nothing else. And by that I mean even if you don't ever call them on the phone, even if you don't ever visit them in person. In fact, we see in the work that we do that about 80% of the notifications that the ministries we serve find, by notification I mean someone raised their hand, metaphorically, and said, it often happens through a survey, but 80% of them come through surveys, through the mail. Only 20% of them happen in person or over the phone. So what that means is that by doing a survey, you can scale the conversation that might take an army of gift officers to do over the phone or in person. You can have that conversation through the mail, and you're going to get better response. You're going to get more people engaging. Yeah, question.
Yeah, Doug's done a bunch of surveys for us, and even though there's not an ask in the survey, checks show up in the survey.
Oh, right.
That's great.
Yeah, so
For months.
Is that right?
Yes.
They come in?
For months.
Yeah.
Well, all of a sudden, I get a letter like 2 months after the survey, and there's more checks in there.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much feedback you get. There's clearly a batch of donors who are itching to respond with us, not by telephone.
Yes. Yes.
So I will often get the same simple checks on the front, but I'll get a whole letter on the back. So read your surveys,
Wow.
front and back.
And what do you think's going on there, Dwayne? Why is that?
They probably were one of the monthlies that's been given for years, and this is the answer I get on the phone. Oh, Dwayne, you're too busy.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there going, no, I'm not. Call me.
Right.
And they won't. But they'll sit there and say, this is who I am, this is what your ministry means to me, and you'll get this love letter. And it's over, and if you read the whole stack of surveys, I'm telling you, they're in there.
Yeah.
And you'll get little notes, and a lot of corrections,
Okay.
pieces of information. It's very subtle, but you better pay attention to it because of the surveys. My wife's passed away. They won't tell you, but they'll mark her name out.
Oh. Yeah.
So he's telling you, look, that made me mad that you're not aware that my wife is gone. So the surveys have become very critical for pieces of information that we would have never gotten.
But I think you've tapped into, I think there's a pent-up demand for these loyal, faithful donors. They know you're busy. They don't dare call you. They don't expect to hear from you as the director. But if you send them a survey and ask for their opinion and ask for their insights and ask them, they will respond and they will tell you. They will fill out and put notes in the margin and on the backside, all of that stuff. Because they, and we live with this tension all the time because on the one hand, people like you want to have a relationship with these people. And there's this guilt you carry, like, oh, I want to respond. And part of my job is to help you kind of sort through that, because on the one hand, I would never say, Dwayne, don't call these people, don't talk to them, right? On the other hand, part of our job is saying, you know, that's what the survey does. It lets you scale these conversations. So they feel like they've been heard, and you are, so it's a, like, again, you know, people say, oh, I want to talk to them. I say, yeah, that'd be great. And if you can't, it's okay. Because the survey has created that dialogue.
So are these surveys that you're sending out, are they general surveys throughout the year, or are they specifically with this in mind?
They're specific. It's specific for plan giving. We want to know, do they want to leave a legacy for the family? Have they left us in the will? Are they interested in how do they feel about, you know, Jesus and the church in general? It's another very specific surveys.
Yeah, in fact, I'm going to get into that here. We'll look at some, it's because I was trying to set up my even if you do nothing else. So I'm going to use Sunday Breakfast Mission as a sample, as an example, because as Bruce said, we've been doing surveys for about 8, 9, 10 years with them. You know, I was talking about, and I do have a binder in the back with some samples of the surveys and some different things. There's some information on the back table you can take on the way out if you want to learn more about how to do this. A lot of the stuff, like there's something on the 12-12-12. I'm going to talk about person, past, and preference in a minute. There's something on that. So what happens, right? So we meet with a ministry like Sunday Breakfast Mission. We want to get to know them, get to know their donors, get to know their vibe. How do they talk to people? How does that work? And then we ask for a donor data dump. We follow the 12-12-12 rule as a baseline, but with them we initially selected 2,000. Later on we bumped it up to 8,000 because they wanted to accelerate their growth. But again, that's where, you know, it depends on the size of your ministry, how many you want to send these to, what's your capacity for follow-up. Again, if lead generation is your main goal, then you probably want to dial it back because you probably don't have the capacity to respond to, you know, hundreds of, you know, if you go to 8, I think you guys had 800 and some, and that was last year, 800 and some responses. So if that's too many, then you dial it back, right? You say, well, we don't want to deal with that many, so we're going to do 2,000. But you want to grow faster, you send a little more than that. All right. So then we send that initial survey, and I want to talk about that a little bit because that's what I said. Planned giving is fun. We talked about you can do this, and so we're trying to just talk about 12-12-12 and turning friends into family. But when I say planned giving is fun, I want to talk about the kinds of questions that we ask, because I think this, for development professionals, is just probably who you are made to be anyway. We talk about person, passion, and preference, PPP. And so, person, let's talk about what does it mean. So person, so these are the kind of questions we ask. These are the kind of questions that if you were going to meet with a donor, you'd probably be asking anyway. And again, the survey just allows you to scale that conversation, whether it's 100, 200, 500, 1,000, 8,000. So how did you first connect with our mission? What inspired your first gift? My favorite story that we surfaced through this was City Gospel Mission in Cincinnati. I don't know if you know those folks, but they had a couple. When they were 16 years old, their church youth group went to serve a meal at the City Gospel Mission in Cincinnati. And this was a boy-girl, and they kind of caught each other's eye in that particular event, and they started dating. and eventually they got married. And on their 60th, and they've been donors throughout their lifetime to the city, on their 60th wedding anniversary, they told the mission that City Gospel Mission was in their will. So how did you first connect? Well, I met my wife there, and we've been married for 60 years.
Oh, my gosh.
That's the kind of story that your marketing and newsletter person wants to get their hands on so they can write it and tell it 100 times over. Because those are the kind of stories that move people to give. And there's hundreds of stories like that in your donor file. So we are asking through the survey those kinds of questions, because we're trying to get at that. But, you know, if you're a donor rep or if you're having those conversations, Melissa, if you're following up with these people who've included you in their will, tell me, what's the story? We would love to hear that, because that warms our heart, it warms yours, and people don't include you in their will because they want to save on their taxes. People don't include you in their will because, you know, they include you in their will because they love what you do, which is the next one. Why do you support the work of our ministry? What are you most passionate about? What gets you excited? Again, you should be asking these questions of your donors regardless, but you should especially be asking these questions of your donors when you're thinking about inviting them to include you in their will. And I think, too, we need to lead with cause here. Sometimes we think, why are you so passionate about the work of, say, Sunday Breakfast Mission or Durham Rescue Mission? No, it's why are you so passionate about the cause of helping the homeless, the hurting, and the hungry? That's donor-centric questions. Right, but it's what you do, so it connects ultimately. And then lastly, preference. How do you prefer to support our work? Do you prefer to support through the mail? Do you prefer to support online? Do you prefer to support at events? Do you prefer to be a recurring monthly donor? Would you consider, so here you can start, would you consider including us in your will? Maybe you already have. Would you have? And then you can check that box. And all of these are in the binder in the back. You can take a picture on your way out if you want to see the samples of the kind of surveys that we do and that recommend that you do as well. But that's it. Person, passion, preference. Those are so important. In fact, we say faith and family, not terminology and techniques. Terminology and techniques is, you know, you're going to die and your money's got to go somewhere, so let's get your affairs in order. You know, it's super track, right? But this is kind of how the planned giving industry has been for many, many years. We're going to bring an attorney in. We're going to talk about complicated estates and assets and management and pooled income funds and charitable remainder trusts and you know, all these things that most owners are like, what? Right? No, it's in fact, Russell James, I'm going to quote him, he told this story, a national charity. They sent out 35,000 planned giving surveys. Now, I don't think this is exactly true, but this is how the story goes. They ask questions like, how much are you worth? How old are you? And how are you feeling today? I don't think they were quite that blunt, but it was along those lines. 35,000 surveys. How many think they got back? That's pretty close. He says 0. I'm like, really? None? They got none back. Yeah. Right. So person, passion, preference.
How to insult your donors, 101.
Yeah.
How to make sure you just destroyed your ministry.
Oh. So, I know, it's crazy. But you stick with person, passion, preference, people will respond. Our national average for response rate is 15.6%. I'm going to talk about, I have Sunday Breakfast Missions averages here. We'll talk about those in a little bit, which is pretty good. We're pretty proud of that. And we have some smaller ministries tend to even get higher.